God is good. All the time? He is good, and it is good to be together today. And we have a number of faces that I've either not seen before or not seen in a long time. And we want you to know how blessed we are to have you present with us today. We're glad that you are here. We hope that your time here will be a blessing to you. And we know that every time that God's people gather together for His purpose, that He is glorified. And so it is just good to be here together as a family. We do want to remind you that following our closing prayer this morning, we do ask that you remain for just a few minutes, and we are going to take that opportunity to officially install our brother Charles Brenniger into the role of servant, designated servant, which is the role of a deacon. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but we're just thankful for that opportunity. As we get into our lesson this morning, our theme for 2024 is simply He is. And our purpose this year is to really look at the character and the nature of God. In January, we began by looking at the fact that God is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning, the end, the first and the last. In February, we looked at the fact that not only does God love us, but God is love. And then in March, we looked at the fact that He is the Almighty. He is all-powerful. This month, we are going to simply look at the fact that He is our God. You see, we need to reflect on this fundamental truth, a truth that is the cornerstone of our faith. He is our God. And those simple words hold immense power. They hold immense power to our lives because they remind us, first of all, of who we are. We are children of the King. We are children of God. We belong to Him. It reminds us of who we belong to. We are His. But it also reminds us of how blessed we are to be in a relationship with God. He is our God. As we look at this, my mind automatically goes to Psalm 95, which is where we'll spend the bulk of our time today. Psalm 95, and we want to begin with the first 5 verses, where the psalmist says, "O come, let us sing to the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into His presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to Him with songs of praise. For the Lord is a great God and great King above all gods. In His hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are His also. The sea is His, for He made it, and His hands formed the dry land." Here the psalmist exalts the very power and the majesty of God. But I want you, as you look at these first 5 verses, it's important to note here that as the psalmist acknowledges the majesty and the power of God, he is going to move now in verses 6 and 7 to this beautiful statement. He's going to take a turn here. Look at what he says in verses 6 and 7. "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. For He is our God, and we are the people of His pasture and the sheep of His hand." These 2 verses are going to be our text this morning because they lay out for us what it means for God to be our God. There are 3 specific things that we want to consider this morning briefly. And the first one is this: He is our God because He made us. We often take that for granted. We recognize that God is sovereign, but the reality is, because He created us, He has all authority over us. He made us. We belong to Him. He is our God because He created us. In Genesis chapters 1 and 2, we're told that God created the universe. He created everything within it. But then in Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2, it says this: "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell therein." Notice here he says, the world and everything in it, including us, belong to God. But why? "For He has founded it upon the seas and established it upon the rivers." We belong to God because He made us. We're His. God created us for purpose. But the second thing we see is that He is our God and we are His people. But there's an important question we have to add to that. Are we really? Are we really God's? You see, He is our God. But are you His? True relationship requires action on both ends. True relationship doesn't come just because one person chooses it. Let me give you an example. I chose Brenda the very first time I laid eyes on her. The very first time I laid eyes on her, I chose her. I can tell you exactly where we were standing. I can tell you what was in the background. I can even tell you what part of the sidewalk we were standing on. At that moment, the first time I saw her, I chose her. I was standing with her cousin. Her cousin and I were good friends, and he introduced us. And as we walked away, I told him, she's it. I choose her. Didn't use those exact words, but that's what I said. The problem is, it took her a while to choose me back. It took a few months to convince her. I chose her the first time I saw her, but we were not in a relationship at that point. Why? Because she had not chosen me. Our God has chosen us. Your God has chosen you. The question this morning is, have you chosen Him? God has chosen you to be His person. But have you chosen Him to be your God? That's what we have to consider. We say He is our God, and that is an awesome statement. But this morning the real question is He your God? Have you chosen Him to be yours? Do you really belong to Him? Because you've given yourself to Him. You've given yourself into that relationship. You see, it requires obedience and it requires total surrender. Solomon says this in Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6. Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6, he says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths." We live in a world where there are a lot of roads we can take. We can choose a lot of ways to try to get to where we want to go. But the reality is there's only one way that's going to get us where we really want to go. And that is a relationship with God. But notice here, that Solomon says, if we will just give ourselves to Him, if we will quit trying to function on our own understanding, thinking that we know it all and that we've got all the answers, and functioning on I think and I feel, if we'll just stop all that business and just surrender ourselves to God, then He will make the path plain for us. He will open it up for us. He will help us see the direction and the way. As we submit to His will and as we align ourselves to His purpose and to His direction, the question this morning is not, is He God? Is He your God? But then the final point this morning is this. While He is our God, we have to recognize that in being our God, we are the people of His pasture. You see, we live in God's world, both physically and spiritually. While we live in this physical world, I function in the world that God has set for me. And so I'm not going to do all the things that everyone else does in the world, because that's not the world I live in. You know, there are times when people will make statements about things that I just don't get and I don't understand, because I don't live in that world. You know, for example, you know, teenagers have a language that I don't get. You know, and I don't think this is even a word in their language now, but there was a time a few years ago when they would say, well, you know, if something was good, they would say, man, it's fire. And I was like, what? Yeah, it's fire? How is that a good thing, right? The reality is, I'm 57 years old. I don't live in that world, and so I don't get the language, right? I don't get the lingo. The reality is, as Christians, we live in God's world. There's a lot that goes on out in this physical world that we should not understand. It should not make sense to us. It should not be logical to us, because it is not the world that we live in. You know, our God is a sustainer of life. And so we live in the world that He creates for us as Christians. In Acts 17 and verse 28, we're told that in Him we live and move and have our being. And so even as we function on this earth, we're living in God's world. And our very breath, our every step is upheld by His grace and by His power. You see, there's no way that I can function in this life without being His child, being sustained and provided for by Him. You may have been wondering why I have this plant up here. It's really for a very simple illustration. You know, this plant is actually one of the few things that I've been able to keep alive. It's because, if you don't know, pothos plants require very little effort. They require very little light. They require that you do water them. But my question is, you know, as you look at this plant, what happens if it never ever receives any more water than what it just got? What if that's it? Never again, ever any more water than that little bit that it got. What's going to eventually happen to that plant? What's going to do? It's going to die. Did it receive water? Sure, a little, because a lot more landed on the floor than on the plant. But it received a little bit of water. There is some water there. But is that water going to sustain this plant? No, why not? This plant requires ongoing sustenance. Just one dab of water is not going to keep it alive. It's going to need water ongoing throughout its lifespan, or it is going to what? It is going to die. I want you to imagine that you and I are the leaves of this plant. You know, so many of us as Christians get this idea that, man, if I can just get a little bit of God, you know, I can be religious once a year or once a month. I can attend worship services every now and then, or I can open up my Bible here and there. If I can just get a little bit of God, that is going to push me through. Folks, we live and move and have our being in Him. That's it. He is our God. And we are the people of His pasture. In Him we live and we move and we have our being. Our life comes from and is sustained through Him. And so we have to recognize this morning that the statement that He is our God is not merely a statement of belief, but it is a profound truth that shapes our lives and sustains our faith. Now, the reality is that this lesson this morning is brief, and it's on purpose because we have some other things we're going to do in a few moments. But it is a vital lesson for us to totally grasp and get in our lives and to get in our hearts and our minds. He is our God. Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. For He is our God, and we are His people, the people of His pasture, and the sheep of His hand. This morning, there's no question that He is God. Every one of us would acknowledge, I believe, you wouldn't be here otherwise, every one of us would acknowledge that He is God. But you see, that's not the question today. The real question is He your God? And He is only your God if you have chosen to make Him your God. If you've taken Him on in your life, if you've acted in obedience and belief and faith in Him, this morning, He is God. Can you truly say today that He is your God? If you're subject to the invitation, we invite you to come as we stand and as we sing.